Welcome to another exciting edition of the Trading Bell. Today we are coming from the beautiful lawns of Muthangari here in Nairobi County. We are actually being hosted by the chairman of the Nairobi Securities Exchange, Mr. Kiprono Kitonny, who is sitting just back here, and he'll be talking to us about the state of the economy and why investment has taken a new trajectory under the COVID-19 pandemic. Well, join me for this discussion, but first, let's take a look at his profile. Mr. Kitonny holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree and a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Nairobi and a Global Executive MBA from the United States International University. Kitonny was appointed chairman of the NSE board on the July 13, 2020 and as a board director of the NSE on May 30, 2018. He is the immediate former national chairman of the Kenya National Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the premier business membership organization in Kenya. He is an established entrepreneur and business leader, having served in several capacities, including being the immediate past chairman of the Media Owners Association and AAR Insurance Limited. During his 7-year tenure at the KNCCI, he was widely credited with revitalizing the organization through a series of transformative initiatives that placed the chamber at the forefront in terms of shaping national trade and general economic policy. He serves as the chair of the Credit Info CRB Kenya Limited, MTech Limited, and Radio Africa Group, which he co-founded in 2000. He also sits on the Advisory Council of the International Fund for Health in Africa, an Amsterdam-based private equity fund, and is one of 2 representatives from Africa in the Global Council of the World Chambers Federation. All right, thank you, sir, for inviting us into your very beautiful gardens and very lush and green. I hope this also signifies how the economy has been performing.
Thank you very much, Abby. It's always wonderful to be on your show. And yes, I mean, I moved to these offices a couple of years back, and with the COVID times, I prefer to work out of this environment. It's beautiful, it's green, and it also allows for social distancing.
Excellent.
Yes.
And Chairman, of course, the business community has been really concerned around what's been happening around the economy when you look at the performance. The president is on record indicating that our economy shrunk significantly during the pandemic. But speaking from where you sit, you have a vantage view of quite a number of things, of course being a veteran businessman and of course as the chair of the NSE. Perhaps what reassurances are you giving Kenyan investors in light of what's happening in the economy?
Abby, I think firstly, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged the global economy. And Kenya, East Africa, and the broader continent of Africa is no exception. We are seeing, unprecedented loss of jobs, corporates suffering from this, governments being unable to meet their obligations and going into huge deficits. My thinking and my hope is that we are past the halfway point of the crisis. And many businesses, many enterprises, not just in Kenya but across the globe, are working on how, on resilience and on a post-crisis scenario of how they will get back to business after the pandemic. So markets have been defensive, but I think that also in a way presents opportunities because we have very low valuations of companies. Risk mitigation is very, very high.
Yes.
And I see a big opportunity in the years ahead.
All right. And Chairman, allow me to also just quickly pick your mind around some of the key trends we are seeing globally and of course in the region.
Yeah.
And as more and more countries continue to receive the vaccine, there seems to be renewed hope that we might just get through the mark. But what trends are we seeing?
Okay, one of the trends that I see is that there's going to be a lot more interest in frontier and emerging markets. This is because of more aggressive returns that you get from these markets. We are seeing a trend also where corporates, investors, and other intermediaries in capital markets across the globe are taking a much greater and keener focus on risk management. We are also seeing a trend where enterprises that are operating in the digital space will enjoy higher valuations. Another global trend is that because of enterprises having suffered the effects of COVID-19, the valuations of businesses are quite low. So we are going to see a rush by investors for these assets. And right now in Kenya, for example, we have 2.4 trillion shillings worth of equities and 2.6 trillion shillings worth of bonds. So there is going to be a big appetite by foreign investors. At the moment, we have 62% of our market funded by foreign investors. So we are seeing a great interest in these emerging markets. And in fact, the Nairobi Securities Exchange, for your information, in the Morgan Stanley Credit Index has improved by almost 10 percentage points.
Quite significant.
Yes.
And just on the back of this, Chairman, we also know that quite a number of companies had a turbulent year when it comes to profitability in 2020. And of course, some did report profit warnings, others reported very dismal performance. On the flip side, we also saw some companies that made some interesting moves when it comes to profitability.
Yes.
Are you concerned around the listed companies at the exchange which reported, of course, profit warnings? And what does this symbolize in the days ahead?
Firstly, Abby, it's very interesting that, yes, we have seen a large number of companies issue profit warnings, and that is part of the early warning indicators that the Capital Markets Authority, who are our regulators, require of them to do. And it's also a way of forewarning investors that the enterprise are not performing up to par. But that is not unique to Kenya. It is something that is, almost a global phenomena at the moment. And the most interesting thing that I would like to tell you is that despite the fact that many of our enterprises are suffering in the pandemic, the Nairobi Securities Exchange outperformed all other bourses in the continent of Africa last year to give a more favorable return on investment to their investors. So I would say that we have demonstrated resilience, and I think for me it's a time to actually encourage both local and international investors to continue to look at our markets insofar as it being a place to place your funds.
All right.
Yes.
Very reassuring sentiments there, Chairman.
Yes.
And of course, taking me to my next area of focus, as a boss, you've mentioned that we've been quite resilient compared to other exchanges in East Africa.
Yes.
At the same time, it would be interesting to hear from you. What will be topping the priorities for the exchange in this fiscal year? I know many of the top leaders in the country have been pushed back to the drawing board. No one knew the pandemic would stay this long.
Let me say that, and thank you for that very good question. Our first priority is to increase listings. You see, we need to deepen and broaden capital market participation in this country. We would like to encourage our government to, allow for further drawdown on the listed enterprise that they have on the market. The government of Kenya has still got a substantial shareholding in many enterprises like Safaricom, like KCB, and many others that are listed on the exchange. So we would like to encourage that they release some of these equities. And that will serve two purposes. One is that it will give investors an opportunity to acquire those shares. And then secondly, it'll actually allow government to realize billions of shillings that can be used to plug the budget deficit that they have today. So our number one priority is really to increase listings, both by public state-owned enterprises as well as by private enterprises. We are talking to many, many companies in the private sector as well. We would like to see private companies like Bidco, private companies like Brookside Dairies and others. We've seen Liaison Group wanting to come to the market, and we would like to go and knock on the doors of many of these other successful family-owned enterprises to come to the market and use that as a place to raise their funds, as well as to mitigate their taxation. Because as you know, one of the benefits of listing a company is that your tax bracket goes from 30% to 20% in terms of corporate tax. The second thing that we'd like to do is to optimize technology. We'd like to create more digital platforms to give more access to the market. We'd like to, right now we are working on gamifying and even introducing security trading in the curriculum of our education system in Kenya. So we'd like to see a lot more participation. We'd like to improve the sophistication of local investors. We'd like to reach out to the cooperative movements, to other collective investment schemes to put more of their money into the market. We'd also like to work on enhancing and diversifying our range of products. As you know, maybe you may not know, but the Nairobi Securities Exchange 2 years ago was rated as the most innovative exchange in the continent of Africa because of the product range that we have. We have a derivatives market. We have rates actively trading. We were the second bourse in Africa to list a green bond. So we have quite a lot of products, but we would like to see more products. I also think that in the foreseeable future, we would like to see if we can have a seamless 24-hour trading on the market. So instead of it being a market that opens and shuts, opening at 9 a.m. and shutting at 3 or 4 p.m. in the afternoon, I mean, I think we need to find a way that people can realize value or rather close transactions on a 24-hour basis, just the same way we have on the M-Pesa platform that today transacts 1/3 of our GDP.
It would be unfair for me to move on without taking you back to this question around listings.
Yes.
There's a lot of interest. We've seen a couple of privately owned companies showing interest.
Yes.
The government as well is keen on bringing on board state corporations that can be able to list. Talk to us about this. How will this pan out, and are there specific numbers behind this?
We have been able to engage the National Treasury. And the National Treasury is the custodian of the government's shares in the enterprises that are listed today that government has a participation as an equity in.
Yes.
And a committee has been formed at the National Treasury that comprises of the NSC, the Treasury, and the Capital Markets Authority, as well as the Kenya Association of Stockbrokers and Investment Bankers. This committee has come up with a list, and it has presented this list to the Cabinet Secretary in the National Treasury. And for me, and from where I sit, I think the best thing that this government would do is to actually take the proposals that come out of that committee very seriously and allow for the further sell down of shares that it has in many, many counters in the exchange today. We'd also want to see initial public offerings of Kenya Pipeline and other enterprises that the government is controlling today. We haven't received yet the response of government with regard to our proposal.
Yes.
But we have sent to them various scenarios that will help government realize, upwards of 500 billion shillings on a more aggressive basis, and perhaps half of that if they decide to take it more conservatively.
All right.
But we are very, very persuaded ourselves that that is the way to go and to stimulate the activity of our exchange.
All right.
Yes.
And as we come to the tail end of our discussion, I'd also want to hear from you. We have the budget coming up.
Yes.
And we've been talking around the interventions you're making with the National Treasury. And as the Nairobi Securities Exchange, one of your biggest mandates is to deepen financial sector.
Yes.
And as we go towards another pandemic budget, what are some of the recommendations from not only the NSC, but also the business community? Because the president has remained tight-lipped when it comes to an economic stimulus program when he introduced the second lockdown.
First and foremost, I want to commend our government because it's very easy. Many people are very critical of government policy, especially economic policy. But I think this government has done a few things right. One is that in the way it's handled the pandemic, if you look at the extent in which the pandemic has affected our economy, it is far less than it has many other economies of the world. I think from the onset, Kenya took the COVID pandemic seriously and took measures to safeguard its population. Obviously, that comes at a risk to business because now many enterprises will obviously be in a difficult position because they are not operating as they should. The second thing is that the government has continued to invest a lot. I mean, we saw yesterday the president launching the land registry, digital land registry. I mean, those are transformational things that are happening in our country, and we are continuing to see huge investment in infrastructure. However, you see the budget deficit that we have as a country and the debt burden continues to be a very, very major concern by all economists in this country. And for me, I would just like to say that it is about time that the government seriously starts to think of reducing its debt profile And one of the ways is to also divest so that it realizes equity, it realizes a return from some of the assets that they are holding currently. The other thing that I would like to really emphasize is there is a need for tax reform in this country, because we must be careful that we don't tax ourselves out of prosperity. And there are many recommendations that we've made. I made these recommendations in the past when I was the head of the Chamber of Commerce. We would like to see a situation where we have a tax clearinghouse. So those who owe taxes to the government and are owed money as for supply of goods and services to the government should have a way that they can set off, so that people are not in a situation where they go into bankruptcy. The other thing that I'd like to suggest is that apart from tax recommendations, I think we need to see tighter control of our state-owned enterprises. You know, I think the fight against corruption has done quite well, but there's a lot more that can be done. We need to speed up the process in which justice is meted out to those who are caught in corruption cases. But more than anything else, I think tax reform is the cornerstone in which this country can be built, can move into the future. Because you see, we need to make sure that as opposed to deepening taxation to existing operators in the market, we should be broadening the tax base.
Correct.
And broadening the tax base actually means creating an environment, an enabling environment for people to be able to transact, to trade in goods and services without too much regulation and too much taxation.
And of course, Chairman, you do know that the issue of taxation is quite emotive for many Kenyans. Majority believe that we are among the most taxed country in the highest actually taxed country in East Africa. And speaking to this, allow me to put you on the spot in regards to how can we champion for a policy change, especially now that we must seize the moment.
You see, I think we need to, first of all, put the horse in front of the cart. What is the reason for this taxation? I think for me, one of the reasons is that one is that government is investing heavily in infrastructure, and many of these investments that they are making, you know, will realize returns into the future.
Yeah.
I mean, return from, say, the standard gauge rail, return from the port projects, the airports, the roads that are the extensive road network that this government has invested in, will not be instant. It will be, realized by generations to come. However, I think that, to me, we need to really start to balance the two. We need to look at an overhead structure that is sustainable. I think one of the unintended consequences of devolution is that we have multiple layers of government. Multiple layers of government means that we have big government and, you know, a very, very high overhead to be maintained. And I think that needs to be looked at very critically to see what is the cost of running this country. Then we also need to look at the regulatory environment. I mean, what are the regulations? I mean, many small and medium-sized enterprises today complain that they are unable to move because they are shackled by massive regulation.
Sure.
They have too many compliances to partake in. So whereas we continue to do well in the ease of doing business, I think we need to actually create a separate index to look at the real situation of doing business on the ground in this country and the things that are holding back enterprises from being able to do what they are should be best at doing. And I think we also need to use this moment to actually, as a country, look at our competitive position in regard to our neighbors. One of the things that we have succeeded in the NSC and in the capital markets in Kenya is that we are certainly in a leadership position in the East and Central Africa region insofar as capital markets development is concerned.
Sure.
So we need to encourage that through better taxation. And I would even suggest that the taxation that is currently being meted on real estate investment trusts needs to be looked at. The VAT on market intermediaries should also be looked at, so that at least we create an environment that enables the growth of capital markets and gives us more avenues of realizing funds, not just for enterprises, but even for government. And I'd like to use also this platform to encourage the government to list a green bond. So at least that way, as a signatory to the Paris Accord, we will be moving in the right direction insofar as ensuring that we are promoting global sustainability.
Interesting sentiments around that. And as we wrap it up,
Yes.
Chairman, it would also be of great concern to just get your thoughts around the governance debate in the country. We've seen a number of companies also taking the unfortunate path where some eventually have to close shop.
Yes.
And Some are actually companies that were listed in the exchange. And from a broad perspective, the two are sort of interlinked. When you talk about sanitizing our tax,
Yes.
we also have to sanitize our governance structures.
That's a very good question, and I'm glad that you're signing off with that very, very important question. Firstly, there is global empirical evidence that enterprises perform better where there is good corporate governance. In fact, good corporate governance should be the cornerstone on which enterprise should be built. In the NSE, we have a very strong self-regulatory committee that is very vigilant insofar as companies' compliance to the CMA Code of Conduct. And we have early warning systems, we have reporting systems, and we are doing quite well insofar as sustaining and maintaining good corporate governance. We've seen many enterprises, the Nakomats of this world, the Uchumis of this world that have gone down because of poor corporate governance. And for that reason, we would like to encourage more enterprises to consider listing. In terms of governance at the national level with the government, I mean, I think a lot more needs to be done insofar as speeding up the cases before the corruption courts in Kenya. We need to make sure that the government continues to pursue the agenda of bringing to book those who are promoting corrupt practices in the country. So governance is the cornerstone for the creation of prosperity and wealth. And we absolutely ascribe to the highest code of corporate governance at the Nairobi Securities Exchange.
All right.
Yes.
Your parting shot to investors?
My parting shot to investors is when the going gets tough, the tough get going. There's no time better than this. I mean, they say never let a good crisis go without looking at the opportunity in the crisis. So right now, valuation of equities is quite low. Bonds yield is also reducing. I want to encourage, Kenyans, there's also been a correction in the value of real estate, the value of properties. Most Kenyans have a tendency to believe that investing is actually the purchase of land. But I think now more than ever before is a time to invest in capital markets, invest in shares, invest in bonds, diversify your investment portfolio.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What a great place to end the conversation. Yes. Thank you so much, Mr. Kiprono Kitonny.
Thank you, Abi.
Chairman, NSE.
Look forward to being here again.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, shooting from the hip, he doesn't mince his words. And quite an insightful discussion there, touching on the future of the economy and, of course, looking at what needs to happen in regards to us as a country, improving our taxation systems, all in a move towards ensuring our revenue collection is up there. Well, that's why we want to wrap it up on this week's edition of The Trading Bell. My name is Abi Agina. On behalf of the entire team, we say bye-bye for now, and always keep engaging with us on our social media handles. And don't forget to wear your mask, sanitize, and of course, social distance. Until next time, see you later.